Dale Raymond Harwick's hands found the copper bus bar in the dark the way they always had. Not by looking, but by knowing where it was supposed to be. Sub-corridor 7 had been flickering for the better part of 6 hours. Not a loose connection. Not a failing ballast. The vibration signature was wrong. A 60-cycle hum that kept dropping to 57, then recovering, like something upstream was pulling load in irregular bursts. Dale had heard that sound before in a refinery outside Casper in 2004, and he had fixed it then by tracing the fault back to a corroded neutral at the main panel. He would fix this the same way. He would find where the problem was and he would correct it because that was the only relationship Dale Raymond Harwick had ever had with broken things. He ran his thumb along the bar's surface. The scarring on his palm, a lattice of raised tissue the color of old leather, running from the base of his thumb to the first 2 fingers, registered nothing. 13,800 volts had seen to that 6 years ago, in a refinery fault that should have killed him and had instead simply rearranged the nerve endings in his right hand into something that no longer transmitted pain signals with any reliability. The company's safety officer had called it a miracle. Dale had called it inconvenient, because it meant he could no longer feel temperature differentials in his grip, which made delicate electrical work harder. It also meant he could hold a live conductor barehanded if he had to. He had never had to. He filed that fact away in the same place he filed most things about his own body, under working conditions rather than personal history, and got on with the job. The lava tube groaned. It did this. Dale had explained this to a young Keth refugee 3 days ago, a narrow-limbed creature whose bioluminescent skin had flickered from amber to near white at the sound, the color of someone discovering they are more afraid than they knew. Just thermal contraction, Dale had told him. The surface cools at night, the basalt contracts, the tube vents the stress. The moon breathes. The Keith had looked at Dale with large, lightless eyes and had clearly found this information deeply unsatisfying as comfort. Waypoint Callahan breathed with the moon, and the people inside it had learned to sleep through the groaning, or had learned to lie awake pretending they had, which was close enough. Dale found the neutral connection at panel 7C and confirmed his diagnosis. Oxidation on the terminal block, probably accelerated by the humidity the refugee population was generating just by existing in an enclosed lunar structure. He cleaned the contact with the small wire brush he kept on his Leatherman, retorqued the terminal, and listened to the hum climb back to 60 cycles and stay there. He closed the panel. On his way back through the main corridor, he passed the roster wall, 340 names in 3 handwritten columns, compiled 4 days ago when the compact emergency frequency had first started broadcasting its loop. Someone, Dale suspected Dr. Orvath, based on the precise, even lettering, had drawn a small star beside 22 of the names. Dale had not asked what the stars meant. He had worked the answer out himself within 30 seconds of first seeing them. Those were the critical patients, the ones who needed powered equipment to stay alive, the ones for whom a power interruption was not an inconvenience but a countdown. He knew the number. 6. 6 of the 22 would be unrecoverable within an hour of losing power to the med bay. Dr. Orvath had told him this quietly, 2 days ago, standing in the corridor outside her treatment room with her hands folded in front of her, and her skin gone completely dark. A Keth physiological response to emotional distress that she clearly could not help, and clearly wished she could. Dale had nodded and gone to check the backup generator. The compact emergency frequency was still playing. He had turned the volume down to the point where it was barely audible. A tinny, looped voice, calm and interminable, coming from the speaker above the main airlock. All non-Verath vessels are advised to clear the Sol system. The Dominion has declared extraction rights. This is a courtesy notification, 31 hours of the same message. Dale had listened to it enough times that he could have recited it from memory, which meant he no longer needed to hear it, which was why the volume was low but not off. He stopped outside the med bay. Dr. Orvath came out. She did not look surprised to find him there. She looked the way she always looked when she had something to say that she would rather not say, slightly luminous around the jaw, which Dale had learned was the Keth equivalent of a held breath. She asked about Connor again. Orvath said, "I know." She's been very calm about it, the way children are calm when they've decided not to show you how frightened they are. I'll talk to her, Dale said. Dale. I know. He paused. I just need something else to say alongside it. Something that isn't only that. Verath put her hand on his arm. Her skin went dark. Completely, instantly dark. The bioluminescence dropping out like a circuit breaker tripping. She didn't say anything. She went back inside. Dale stood in the corridor for a moment with his hand on the wall, feeling the bus bar behind it the way you could feel a pulse through a wall if you knew where to press. Connor's voice was in his shirt pocket. 40 seconds of audio, recorded 11 minutes before Titan Station lost comms, stored on a chip the size of a thumbnail. Dale had listened to it once, sitting in the cargo bay of the shuttle that brought him to Callahan with the lights off and the door sealed. He had listened to the whole 40 seconds. He had not listened to it since. Tell Maisie her dad loves her. He took his hand off the wall and went to check the generator coolant level, because that was the kind of thing you checked when you were the only person at Waypoint Callahan who knew how the station worked, and right now, that felt like the only useful thing about him. The eastern access shaft blew at 0347. Dale heard it before he felt it. A sharp, percussive crack that the lava tube walls picked up and threw back as a rolling boom, followed immediately by a pressure differential that popped his ears and sent a wave of particulate through the corridor. He was already moving before the dust reached him, because he had spent 34 years learning that the time between an electrical fault and the consequential fire was exactly as long as you wasted standing still. He got to sub-panel 4 in 19 seconds and saw what the explosion had done. The primary conduit from the main grid to the medbay junction had been severed by shrapnel. Clean cut, no burn, which meant the breach had been structural rather than electrical. The backup had already kicked in. He could hear the Caterpillar 3516 3 corridors away, cycling up to load with the low, authoritative rumble of 12 diesel cylinders doing what they were built to do. He pulled up the load calculation in his head. Current draw from the medbay alone, 180 kilowatts, continuous. Backup capacity, 4.8 megawatts total, but with life support, heating, and the passive communication array pulling concurrent load, the effective available margin was closer to 600 kilowatts. At this draw rate, he had approximately 40 minutes before the fuel reserves hit the threshold, where load shedding became automatic, and the medbay went dark. 38 minutes now because he had stood here calculating for 2. He also heard, from the direction of the eastern shaft, movement. Not the movement of debris settling. The movement of things that were trying not to be heard and were not entirely succeeding. Dale went to the generator room. He did not go for a weapon, because there were no weapons in Waypoint Callahan. It was a refugee shelter. It had been built to keep people alive, not to keep threats out, because no one had planned for there being threats that required keeping out. This was, in Dale's professional assessment, a design oversight he was going to have to work around. He pulled the access panel on the main distribution board. The lighting grid was fed from Bus C, a separate circuit from the life support and medbay loads, which meant he could kill it without affecting anything that mattered. He found the disconnect breaker, confirmed it by feel, and pulled it. All 3 main corridors went dark. In the generator room, Dale stood in total blackness and listened to the station's acoustic signature change. The hum of the fluorescent lights, a sound so constant that no one noticed it until it stopped, dropped out, and in the quiet that followed he could hear very clearly the sound of armored movement in Corridor 2. Heavy. Multiple contacts. Moving slowly, because they had light equipment, and he had just taken their ambient reference away. Dale could not see Corridor 2. He did not need to. He had wired Corridor 2 himself. He knew where every junction box was, every floor grate, every bend, every low-hanging conduit that a man who wasn't paying attention to his height would catch on the back of the helmet. He had wired this station 12 years ago on a federal contract that had paid adequately and been largely unremarkable, and he had done it right because he always did it right, and right now that was the only thing between 340 people and whatever had just come through the eastern shaft. He took the Leatherman off his belt and moved. In the repair bay there was a spool of 240-volt THHN cable, 60 meters, 12-gauge black insulation, rated for the kind of mundane electrical work that kept a station running. Dale cut a 40-meter length in the dark by touch, stripped 8 centimeters of insulation from one end with the Leatherman's blade, and ran the stripped end along the floor to the metal grating at the Corridor 2 choke point, the section between the eastern shaft access and the medbay junction, the narrowest passage in the station, which funneled all movement through a 3-meter-wide section of steel floor grating that was bonded to the station's structural frame. He tied the stripped copper to the grating via the nearest grounding lug, ran the other end back to the distribution panel in the generator room, and connected it to the 240-volt bus. Then he waited. The movement in Corridor 2 paused. He heard, faintly, what might have been communication. A series of low harmonic tones that the passive array in the main room was probably logging as Verath tactical band traffic. Then the movement resumed, slower now, more deliberate. They were being careful. The sound of contact was not subtle. It was the sound of 240 volts finding a path to ground through a conductor that had not, until this moment, been part of the plan. The grating discharged in both directions simultaneously, toward the frame and through whatever was standing on it, and the result was a series of sounds that Dale categorized, professionally and without particular emotion, as initial discharge, secondary collapse, equipment impact, silence. Then from somewhere upstream, a transmission. Dale's passive array speaker, still running on the life support circuit, rendered it in translated English with a half-second lag. Strike Team Callahan, report status. Thermal scan shows one mobile life sign inside the structure. Confirm. Is the Tier 4 attempting to flee or has it become confused? Command is waiting. Dale stood beside the distribution panel in the dark and listened to this message twice. Then he understood several things simultaneously. They could see his heat signature. They had thermal scanning capability. They had read his position as a single moving organism inside the structure, and their first interpretive frame, was that he was either running away or lost. The possibility that he was doing something purposeful had not appeared in the message. It had not appeared because, in the Verath tactical model, a single organism did not do purposeful things against a coordinated strike team. A single organism fled or it didn't, and either way it was manageable. Dale thought about this for a moment. Then he picked up his cable spool and moved toward the transformer room, which was deeper into the station, further from the refugees, and directly away from the direction a fleeing organism would go. He let his heat signature be visible, he let them follow it. The transformer room was 40 meters down Corridor 3, past the repair bay and the secondary storage, at the far end of the station's utility spine. Dale had spent more time in this room than in any other part of Callahan during his original installation contract. He knew it the way he knew the houses he'd grown up in, by the smell, by the particular quality of the air, by the sound the ventilation made when the load changed. He also knew where the ammonia coolant junction was. Secondary junction, east wall, third pipe from the left. The one with the manual override valve he had installed himself, because the automated control system used a pneumatic actuator that he had never trusted at this pressure rating, and the work order had given him discretion on the install method, and his discretion had been, put a manual override on it, just in case. The line was pressurized to 180 psi, liquid ammonia. At ambient lunar station pressure it would gasify immediately on release, cold, dense, heavier than the station's nitrogen-oxygen mix, which meant it would hug the floor and fill the corridor from the bottom up. The Verath soldiers breathed a nitrogen-dense atmosphere. Ammonia toxicity affected nitrogen-breathing organisms differently than oxygen-dependent ones. Dale opened the override valve. He did not stay to watch the gas fill the corridor. He moved to the oxygen-acetylene welding station on the south wall, an upright Lincoln electric rig, the kind he had used on industrial sites since his 20s, and ran a length of copper wire from the rig's pilot igniter circuit back to the station's 12-volt emergency circuit. Then he moved to the far end of the room, behind the transformer bank, and waited for his count. Ammonia air mixtures become flammable between 15% and 28% by volume. At 180 psi and the volume of Corridor 3, he estimated he needed 40 seconds of bleed time for the lower explosive limit to be reached in the corridor section closest to the access shaft, away from the transformer room, away from the medbay junction, away from anywhere the fire needed not to go. He counted to 43, because 40 was his professional estimate and 3 was his personal margin. He triggered the igniter. He heard the result without seeing it. A low concussive thump that the lava tube walls picked up and distributed evenly, followed by a sustained roar that dropped in pitch as the fuel burned through, followed by the sound of the ventilation system doing exactly what it was designed to do, pulling hot gas toward the intake duct on the eastern wall, which meant the burn traveled away from the med bay and toward the access shaft, which was where Dale had needed it to go. The transmission came 12 seconds later. Command, Strike Team Callahan. We have lost contact with 4 soldiers. The structure contains, something is wrong with our atmospheric sensors. There is a combustion event in the eastern corridor. The Tier 4 life sign is still mobile. Command, please advise. Our doctrine does not have a classification for this behavior. Dale noted the phrase does not have a classification. He noted the phrase something is wrong with our atmospheric sensors. He noted the particular cadence of the transmission, the way the translator rendered it with slightly longer pauses than the first one, as if the speaker was searching for words that did not exist in the operational vocabulary and was unsettled by their absence. He moved back to the main distribution board. The Caterpillar 3516 was still running. Dale had 22 minutes of backup power remaining at current draw. He needed to do 2 things in that time: restore power to the medbay and make sure no one else came through the access shaft. He could only do one of them from inside the station. He needed to do the other one from outside it, which was going to be a problem, because outside was the lunar surface, and Dale was wearing a work shirt and carrying a Leatherman. He found the emergency EVA locker in Subcorridor 4 and suited up. The suit was a standard-issue maintenance EVA rig, not combat-rated, not pressurized against anything more threatening than vacuum, equipped with a 90-minute oxygen supply and a radio transmitter he was going to leave off. It took him 4 minutes to get into it because his right hand could not feel the suit seals, and he had to visually confirm each one. 4 minutes he did not have. He went up the surface access ladder anyway. The lunar far side was exactly what it always was. Black sky, no stars visible through the suit visor's anti-glare coating, regolith the color of old concrete stretching to a horizon that was too close and too sharp, and above it the unmoving geometry of Waypoint Callahan's communication tower, which was bolted to a basalt formation that Dale had personally certified as a suitable anchor point 12 years ago. The tower anchors were grade 8 structural bolts, 5 of them, each 1 inch in diameter and 6 inches into the basalt. Dale had spec'd them himself. He had chosen grade 8 because the job called for grade 5, and he always went 1 grade above on anything structural. He had also noted in his installation report that the basalt formation was horizontally stratified, layered, like sedimentary rock, the strata running left to right, which meant that vertical loading was excellent, and lateral loading was acceptable but shear loading, the kind you'd get if the bolts were removed and the tower's mass shifted horizontally, would cause the formation to fail along the strata lines. He had written this in his report because it was relevant engineering data. He had not imagined he would someday use it as a weapon system. Dale got to the first anchor bolt with the snap-on ratchet wrench from the EVA kit and started turning. 1 inch diameter grade 8 properly torqued. In Earth gravity, this would have taken a breaker bar and significant effort. In lunar gravity, it took significant effort and slightly less time. He worked methodically, bolt by bolt, because that was the only way to work when there was a lot to do and not enough time to do it in. He had the snap-on's ratchet mechanism set to reverse. He could feel the vibration of each turn in the wrench handle, but not in his right hand, which he was using to brace against the basalt because it didn't matter if the rock was cold. 4 bolts out, 1 remaining. Below him, through the basalt, he could feel the faint vibration of movement in the eastern access shaft. The Verath strike team was trying to regroup at the breach point. He could feel them in the rock the way you could feel a problem in a circuit before you found the fault. A wrong frequency, a wrongness in the baseline. He pulled the last bolt. The tower shifted. Grade 8 into horizontally stratified basalt with 5 anchor points, providing the only vertical resistance. When the anchors went, the tower's mass translated into a horizontal vector along the path of least resistance, which was downward into the shaft, which was where the access shaft opened into the lava tube's ceiling. 6 meters of basalt came down. Dale heard it as a low, sustained groan that climbed into a crack and then was over. He got back down the ladder. He was moving fast now because he had 9 minutes of backup power left, and he still had to patch the medbay conduit, and somewhere between the surface and sub-corridor 3, something had happened to his left side. He noticed it the way he noticed most physical things, as information rather than experience. There was warmth spreading from his hip to his lower ribs, and when he reached back and pressed with his fingers, he found a tear in the EVA suit, and below it, a cut approximately 8 centimeters long and 4 centimeters deep. An anchor bolt fragment probably from the collapse. It was bleeding with the particular steady insistence of a wound that had cut something important, but not critical. He packed it with the thermal underlayer from the suit's torso section, which he pulled free and pressed against the wound and held in place by tightening his tool belt over it. The belt was 12-gauge wire on a nylon frame. He cranked it down until the pressure was sufficient and then kept moving, because 9 minutes was 9 minutes regardless of what was happening to his left side. The Caterpillar was at 80% load when Dale got back to the generator room. He could hear the fuel level in the sound of the exhaust, the RPM holding, but the injector cycle slightly extended, the engine working harder to maintain speed as reserves dropped. He had heard this sound in generators across 3 decades and 2 continents, and it meant he had less time than 9 minutes. He ran. From the repair bay, he pulled 40 meters of Klein Tools for Enduro welding cable, the heaviest gauge in the station's inventory, rated for the kind of current he was about to push through it. He dragged it down corridor 3 toward the medbay junction, leaving a smear on the floor behind him that he was aware of but not looking at, because looking at it would not change it, and he needed to look at the conduit. The primary conduit had been sheared cleanly. The shrapnel from the eastern shaft breach had taken a 12-centimeter section out of the 4-0 cable that fed the medbay. Clean cut, no burn. Good news for the terminations. Dale stripped both ends with the Leatherman, connected the welding cable in parallel across the breach, and crimped the connections with the mechanical crimping tool from his shirt pocket, which he had carried on his person every working day of his professional life, because in 34 years he had never gone to a job site and found a crimping tool that wasn't in his own pocket. He got the second crimp done with 2 minutes 40 seconds on the generator readout. He tied the bypass cable to the wall junction with a half meter of 12-gauge wire, because a bypass that wasn't secured was a bypass waiting to become a new problem. And then he sat down on the floor of the corridor with his back against the wall and his legs out in front of him. From Dr. Orvath's med bay, 12 meters away, he heard the equipment cycle back to full power. He heard the particular frequency of the life support monitors resuming their rhythm. He heard Dr. Orvath's voice, very quietly, saying something in Keth that the translator in his suit rendered as, "We have power, we have power," repeated twice, like a confirmation she was making to herself, rather than to anyone in the room. Dale listened to this. He did not get up. The transmission came through the passive array speaker at low volume, the last one different in character from the previous 2. The translator had a longer lag than before, as if it was uncertain about the word choices. Command, this is, we need a status reclassification on the Tier 4. It is not fleeing, it is not confused. It is, command. What is the word for an organism that does this alone? We don't have the word. Please advise immediately. Dale sat against the wall and breathed and listened to this message and did not find it satisfying exactly, but found it accurate. They did not have the word. He was not surprised. He was not sure English had the word either. Not a single word that meant the thing a man does when his son is dead and his granddaughter is 12 meters away, and he wired this building himself and knows exactly what it can do. He was still trying to think of the word when the CSF Meridian team came through the main airlock. The Keth medic who reached him first was moving fast and then stopped. Dale heard the cessation of footsteps and then a long pause and then footsteps again, slower. "You are alive," the medic said. "Generator's running hot," Dale said. "Someone should check the coolant." The medic crouched beside him and ran a scanner across his chest, and then his side, and then his right hand, and then paused on his right hand for a longer time than the other readings had taken. "The organism is alive," the medic said, apparently into a communicator rather than to Dale directly. "Core temperature 39.8 degrees Celsius. Estimated blood loss 34%. Heart rate 54 BPM and dropping. It has entered a post-adrenal parasympathetic crash. I am reading evidence of prior electrical contact on the right hand, extensive, healed, and acute shrapnel trauma to the left lateral torso. The organism is conscious and attempting to argue with me about the seriousness of its injury." A pause. "I have never seen a Tier 4 post-combat presentation. Their biology does not. I don't have the framework for this. I'm just going to treat it." "The coolant line is the second junction on the east wall," Dale said. "Manual override. Don't let the automated system take over. It's never been reliable at this pressure rating." The medic put a field dressing on his side. Dale closed his eyes. He thought about the Snake River in January 2009, a transformer fault at 3 a.m., the canyon walls throwing back the sound of the arc flash, the way the light had lit the whole gorge for half a second like a new star briefly considering whether to exist. He had fixed it alone in 4 hours. Nobody had known it happened. The river had known, maybe. He thought about Connor at 7 years old, standing on a job site in Billings in his 2 large work boots that someone had laced up for him, watching Dale trace a conduit with his finger and asking, "How come electricity's invisible?" "It's not," Dale had told him. "You just have to know where to look." The medic said something, and Dale did not hear it, and the floor of Corridor 3 was cold through the EVA suit, and then it wasn't anything at all. 11 days later, someone had left coffee on the table beside his bed. Dale knew it was real coffee and not the recycled station variety, because the smell was different, denser, with the slightly acidic edge that recycled coffee lost in the second processing cycle. He lay still for a moment with his eyes open, looking at the ceiling of the CSF Meridian's recovery bay, and listened to the background hum of a ship in lunar orbit, which was a different frequency than the background hum of Waypoint Callahan, and told him, without being told, where he was. The coffee was still warm. Someone had checked on him recently. He sat up slowly. His left side informed him in specific and comprehensive terms that this was inadvisable. He did it anyway because the terms were informative rather than prohibitive, which was the only distinction his body made between acceptable and unacceptable physical conditions. He picked up the coffee and drank it. On the wall screen opposite, a coalition news feed was running without sound. The graphic behind the anchor showed the seal of the Galactic Sovereignty Compact, and a secondary image Dale recognized after a moment as a still frame from Callahan's passive array camera, the corridor with the blood trail. Someone had been in possession of that footage. Someone had released it. He was still looking at it when the door opened and a human UNSC officer came in with a data tablet and an expression that suggested she had been hoping he would sleep longer. "Mr. Harwick." "Captain." "You've been asked to appear before the Compact Emergency Session," she said. "Fleet Admiral Veth Sora of the Verath Dominion has filed a formal complaint. She's arguing the Callahan incident constitutes an unprovoked military attack on a lawful Dominion extraction operation." She paused. "Her argument has technical merit under current Compact law." "I imagine it does," Dale said. "You don't have to appear." "I know. The Coalition Diplomatic Corps is prepared to represent Earth's position if—" "What time is the session?" She told him. He asked where his shirt was. She told him it had been cleaned but that the cut in the left side was irreparable, which he already knew because he'd made the cut himself to get the EVA suit off. He asked if it was wearable despite the cut. She said technically yes. He said that would do. The compact session chamber was a large, circular room designed to make all 200 species feel equally unimportant in relation to the body as a whole. The seats were arranged in concentric arcs, tiered, with a central floor where representatives addressed the chamber. The lighting was calibrated for the average visual spectrum of member species, which meant it was slightly too warm for human eyes and slightly too dim for Verath ones. Dale walked in. He was moving slightly wrong on his left side, and he knew it, and he did not compensate for it, because compensating would require thinking about it, and he had other things to think about. He was carrying a coffee thermos. He had not been asked to carry it. He had brought it anyway because he had been carrying a thermos to job sites since 1993, and there was no condition under which this struck him as a meeting requiring different equipment. He did not go to the central floor. He walked to the section of seating where the Verath delegation was positioned and stood in front of it, which was not the protocol, but was the most direct way to address the person he had come to address. Fleet Admiral Vethsora was tall and bilaterally symmetrical in the way that the Verath were, a species that had evolved in deep water and carried the geometry of that origin in the wide-set placement of their eyes, and the narrow, high-pressure adapted ribcage and the skin that shifted through the red spectrum in response to threat. The way deep-water organisms used bioluminescence for communication when light was otherwise absent. Her skin was currently the muted, flat ochre of a Verath in full diplomatic composure. Dale opened his thermos and took a drink. "You called our system a black water," he said. "I looked that up. Means nobody's home worth worrying about." The chamber was very quiet. "I want to make sure I understand your position," Dale said. "You glassed Titan, killed 4,200 people including my son, sent a strike team into a building with 340 refugees in it, including my 8-year-old granddaughter. And your argument, to this body, today, is that I did something wrong." He put the thermos down on the railing in front of him. "I'm a retired electrician from Billings, Montana. I wired substations for 34 years. I fix things for a living. That was the job. Something broken. You find the fault. You correct it. You make sure it doesn't happen again." He looked at Vethsora directly. "I want to be very clear about what happened at Waypoint Callahan. I fixed the problem." Vethsora's diplomatic composure was, Dale noted, extremely good. The skin held. She addressed the chamber rather than him, which was correct procedure and which he was ignoring. The Tier 4 organism designated as a non-combatant civilian engaged Dominion military personnel in an active extraction zone without authorization from any recognized governing body, she said. Her voice was processed through a translator that rendered it in a flat, even register that was probably close to her actual tone. Under Compact Charter, Article 7, Section 3, Non-Member Civilizations. "Admiral," Dale said. She stopped. It was a small stop, barely a pause. But it was a stop. "I used what was on hand," Dale said quietly. He was not raising his voice. There was no need to raise it. "A spool of 12-gauge THHN cable, a Leatherman, an ammonia line I installed myself, a generator I spec'd in 2031, 5 anchor bolts I torqued to 120 foot-pounds 12 years ago and still knew by feel in the dark." He picked up the thermos. "Next time, and I sincerely hope there isn't one, there'll be more on hand." The chamber was, for a moment, completely silent. Vethsora's skin moved through ochre and into something darker. Not red, not the arterial threat flush, not yet, but something in the transitional register, the color Verath biologists classified as recognition of an unclassified condition. It was visible to everyone in the chamber. She knew it was visible. The knowing was visible too. She said nothing for 6 full seconds. When she spoke, her voice carried a quality the translator did not have a word for, a slight compression in the lower register, a careful flatness that was not the same as the flatness before, because the flatness before had been the flatness of something that did not need to be careful. "The compact will take the matter under formal deliberation," she said. "That's fine," Dale said. "I'll be around." He picked up his thermos and walked out. That evening, the CSF Meridian's medical bay had visiting hours. Dale had learned this by asking because he was not the kind of person who navigated institutional environments by assumption when direct inquiry was available. He knocked on the door of room 7 and opened it. Maisie was sitting up. She had Connor's eyes, the same particular shade of brown that caught light differently depending on the angle, warm from the front and something more serious from the side. She had been asking about him, the nurse had said. 3 days' worth of asking. Dale sat on the edge of the bed. He took out the chip from his shirt pocket. He had not listened to it since the cargo bay of the shuttle, 14 days and 1 incident report ago. He looked at it for a moment, then at Maisie. Connor's voice in the small room, 40 seconds of a man talking quickly and steadily. The way engineers talked when they were assessing a situation and had not yet arrived at the part where they didn't know what to do. He said her name. He said he was fine, don't worry. He said Grandpa was going to look after her. He said there were things he was sorry for not having said sooner. He said the thing he had always said when he hung up the phone with her, since she was old enough to understand words. I love you, kid. Your dad loves you. You're in the corridor outside. A junior coalition diplomat was waiting with a data tablet and the collective inquiry of 17 member species who had watched the passive array footage and were now interested in formal military consultation talks with Earth. She caught up to Dale when he came out 30 minutes later and delivered the inquiry with the careful formality of someone who had been briefed that informal approaches to this particular human had a way of going unexpectedly. Dale considered this.